I will now invite Heidi Hauf to present. Her presentation discusses the virtual trade framework which enables defense to rapidly adapt to emerging technologies and skill sets. Heidi has over 15 years experience leading strategy, culture change, and policy with business, government, and NGOs. After starting her career as an intelligence officer in the Australian Army, Heidi has worked on long-term systemic sustainability issues across public services, natural resource management, and sustainable business practices in regional Australia, East Africa, Europe, and the UK.
Thanks, Yuli. I'm just going to plug this in, so give me a minute. I have the honour of following a bunch of highly intelligent technical experts in sustainable aviation fuel. So this is going to be a slightly different presentation in that I am going to zoom out slightly and take a look from an industry perspective at some of the different pathways towards sustainable aerospace. As Yuli mentioned, I am a veteran, and I've also spent a large part of my career working on sustainability across multiple sectors. And I'm really passionate about the role that the Defence Forces across the world play in both helping us transition to be part of a sustainable future, but also the impacts that these macro sustainability issues have on our Defence Forces and how we need to adapt. I am going to be using a few glimpses into a not too distant future, if you think about it from an innovation point of view, to talk about technologies that are being developed by Boeing in partnership with a whole bunch of amazing partners, including the CSIRO, as a vehicle to explore some of the innovation that's going on, but yet where some of the gaps are. Now, a lot of these technologies are coming from a commercial perspective, but really it's agnostic, and there's a lot of defence applications that I'll bring forward in example. I think sustainability is one of these fantastic lenses that helps us zoom out and look beyond some of the sometimes unhelpful silos or barriers between industries and sectors, and really forces us to innovate and to take learnings from other places and perhaps apply them differently. So I won't labour this point, but I'm wanting to kind of really hone in on why we're talking about sustainability and sustainable aviation fuel. Last year, we saw the world refocus on the 2015 Paris Agreement to stay as close to 1.5 degrees warming from pre-industrial times as possible. We know all too well in Australia what it means, climate change in particular, to our economies and to our resource access to resources, particularly water, and what that means for our industries and communities. I think apart from what we've already heard, particularly around fuel security, energy security, some of the macro level disruptions to supply chains and defence, and of course, increasingly interoperability with our allies as they move to alternative fuels and other technologies. I think the Australian Defence Force is really well placed to speak from experience on responding to increasing impacts from unsustainable development and particularly from climate change. I won't go through all of these, but Air Force in particular has been very busy in the last few years, and we know through our support to defence that the application of defence capability for domestic and regional responses to emergencies, civil unrest, and search and rescue is increasing. And we think really long and hard about how our innovations can help support defence capabilities already in play to do this, or perhaps bring new capabilities into play. I won't labour this graph, but I thought coming from a commercial point of view, I'd introduce how aviation looks at reducing emissions as our biggest contributor to climate change. So the chart that you can see up there today, up there now, is the illustration of the carbon reduction scheme for international aviation. Last year, our industry agreed to net zero emissions by 2050, and that built upon this CORSIA plan that has been in place for some time. And really what I want you to take away from this is there's 4 key areas that the industry is focusing on. The first one being the application of operational improvements. to existing technology. Second one being the introduction of new technologies, and that includes new fleet or fleet renewal. And the biggest one is alternative fuels, sustainable aviation fuels, and then what can't be tackled through that, we tackle through offsets. Again, the biggest thing I want you to take away is the size of that green wedge and the role that sustainable aviation fuel has to play in decarbonising aerospace. Now, what you see up on the screen today, there now is Boeing's pathway towards 2050, but it's very similar across different OEMs in the sector. And as you can see, the industry plan that I just outlined through Corsair has very similar buckets of activity. I'll run through these briefly and talk about some of the defence activity. So the first kind of pathway to decarbonising is through fleet renewal. And in the commercial space, we've seen a lot of airlines to speed up their fleet renewal as they prefer to bring new fleets, more efficient fleets into commercial action rather than bringing in old fleets. We see as much as 25% efficiencies and fuel reductions, therefore emissions reductions through commercial fleet introduction. And if you think about what that means for Air Force, particularly our Air Force and the commercial derivative platforms that we have and some of the renewal of that fleet's happening around the world today, there's some significant opportunities there. In the operational efficiency at the top there, this is all the ways that we can use data and software and that information to fly our platforms more efficiently, to maintain them, to give them more time on mission. And so a huge part of this is data analytics and actually doing more with the data that we have to put that information in the hands of operators. The third one is something you've heard all about today so far from my fellow speakers, and that's renewable energy. We call it renewable energy. We mostly talk about sustainable aviation fuel or SAF, but obviously there's a whole bucket of activity in that space. We are really supportive of some of the initiatives that we've heard here, both with commercial and defence, in helping to be the OEM that's supporting certification of platforms for SAF use. In fact, over a decade ago, back in 2010, I believe, Boeing worked with the US Navy in the work to certify the Super Hornet and also C-17 Globemaster to fly on SAF blends. And there's also work that's been done with the Chinook helicopters and Apache. Also in this bucket of activities where we talk about the operations in creating the aircraft. And so when you think about a product life cycle, there's embedded carbon. And so the manufacturing facilities that we have globally is a real effort for us to maintain them at net zero emissions and take a bigger wedge out of that being offsets to on-site renewable energy in the production process. And then finally, our fantastic Ghost Bat. The air power teaming system is an example of some of the advanced technologies that we're going to see coming into play as part of this pathway towards net zero. We are hoping to see what we can do about the Ghost Bat flying on sustainable aviation fuel and being certified to do so. But this also includes some of the technologies in hydrogen and electric flight and a bunch of the supporting digital architecture as well. Okay, so we're going to take a few glimpses into the future and I'll pull out some key technologies. But when we think about 2050 in this environment, we've thought about where people will be living and how, and then the kind of mobility and the types of work that they'll be doing and how aerospace as an industry will support them. One of the key things to take away is that from a commercial point of view, at least, this is only 1.5 to 2 innovation cycles away, which is both really exciting and also kind of terrifying to think about the leaps in technology that we have to make. So firstly, if we think about technology, aerospace technology in 2050, it'll be operating on different energy sources. They'll be operating on renewable energy. And so we've heard about sustainable aviation fuel, and for a long time into this time period, we'll be seeing long-haul flights rely on that, whereas new technologies might come into shorter segments. So some of the examples of the technologies that we're working on with partners now in this space, the one that I want to pull out is the support to defence in deploying sustainable aviation fuel and understanding what it means to logistics, supply chains and certification of platforms. We are part of a NATO science and technology group at the moment that is trying to share technologies, trying to share information from those already using SAF in their defence forces and find common standards and ways of making this a faster process. Another glimpse into the future shows us that we will have more megacities and more of us will be living in large urban centres, and that these will be largely automated or augmented city centres. And what this means is a vast amount of data that will be used and applied through artificial intelligence to help us move around cities in an efficient way. Some of the technologies that we're seeing that's helping us create this future in a more sustainable way is obviously around data analytics and artificial intelligence. Our FantaWorks team, has done some fantastic work in this space. We also, from a commercial point of view, are taking a lot of learning from the Boeing joint venture into our eVTOL, which is the company's called Whisk, and it's a small air taxi. But we see a lot of learning that will come from that, both in deploying electric flight, but also autonomous flight in a commercial setting that we can pull across from commercial into defence. And then finally, taking a glimpse into the future, there'll be a lot more people flying if we kind of follow trends pre-COVID and understand the transactions of goods and services around the world and how much of them will be serviced through aviation. We estimate that there'll be relatively 10 billion people travelling every year by 2050, and that this will drive the need for zero-emission vehicles. So some of the things that we're doing to explore this space, most recently we tested a liquid hydrogen cryogenic fuel tank. That was with NASA. A lot of the hydrogen work that we've done over the past 15 years has been coming out of the space part of the business, using hydrogen as a fuel source in space. This was a really successful trial of a fuel tank roughly the size that will be needed for commercial aviation over some of the regional kind of distances. And so it's a really great step towards that space. But as my fellow speakers have already pointed out, hydrogen flight, particularly commercially, is some way off. And another one probably relevant to those of you in the room is the work we've done on the Scan Eagle 3 and some experiments in the US using a hydrogen fuel cell to power its flight and think about applications for other air vehicles of its size. Okay, so I'm keeping it short and sweet, but hopefully there's some interesting questions. It has been a very high-level, quick run-through from an industry perspective, but I guess what I hope to do was to position some of the other technologies and pathways towards a more sustainable aerospace alongside the really important and urgent activity needed in sustainable aviation fuel and the role that I can see for defence in that. So thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. You mentioned sharing of technologies. What is the relationship that, as a manufacturer, does Boeing have with large airliners, and how are you influencing them?
Yeah, well, we have obviously a very close relationship with our customers in the commercial space. And when it comes to sustainability, we have really seen a shift in gears from airlines understanding their shareholders' expectations, but also the flying public's expectations on sustainability and reducing the airlines' carbon footprint. And so the engine manufacturers and the aircraft manufacturers, they see as a big part of the solution towards that. And we're now seeing innovative partnerships to produce fuel, not just test the fuel capability in the aircraft. We have what we call the Eco Demonstrator, is a program we use with mostly commercial partners to test technologies on aircraft that are live in commercial fleet. So we do a lot of those technology testing through that program, but we are seeing a ramp up of expectations from airlines in the role that the manufacturers have in scaling up the production of sustainable aviation fuel. And I might also add, not just SAF, but also that full life cycle approach. People are really interested in what happens to everything that goes into an aircraft, the materials that we use, and what happens when it's decommissioned.
Outstanding. Look, I would love to ask more questions, but it seems that I just received a message saying the online session's closed, so we're over time. Thank you very much again for presenting, and if you could, you put your hands together once again, and we'll all go to lunch.